Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Haze. I'm an artist and speed painter from Malaysia, and today I'll be walking you through the making of this Ghost of Tsushima's fan art. So this type of art is actually a mixed media illustration where I mix digital and traditional medium to create a piece of art that resembles traditional Chinese painting. A while back I did a video time-lapse of how I did a vagabond fan art, which is something similar to what we are doing today, and it was very well received. So since then I've created a few more, but I've seldom do this kind of art because it's very difficult to create, and also it's a very tedious and long process. But today you guys are so lucky because I'm going to share the entire process from beginning to the end on how I create this Ghost of Tsushima's fan art. So a little bit about this fan art. I was really inspired by the game. When I saw it, the aesthetic really appealed to me, and I thought that it would be perfect for me to do this style once more. And so that leads us to today. So let's get started with the whole process itself.
Step 1.
The first step we're gonna do is I will actually find and get a pose from Pinterest. So I found this pose that I really like, and I thought that this would be a good pose to work from. So once the pose is in Procreate, I'm just going to crop and move things around. I actually made the body smaller so that the anatomy is a bit more stylized, and then after that I'm going to put in all the guides. Once the guides are in, I'm finally going to sketch it, and once you sketch it, the first step is done. And now of course the next step would be to take screenshots from the game. The game has an incredibly good photo mode system, so this really helped when we get all the screenshots and the renders that we need. So I got some from the mask and the armor itself, and I got a few lighting samples as well. So once I have all these samples, I put them into Procreate, I transform them and rotate them, and then I collage them into the locations where I want them to be. Once the collage is done, it's time for step 4, which is to sketch everything all together. So if you look here, the red sketch is actually from all the collages that I did from before, and the green sketch are actually imagined because I couldn't get the pose to be exactly where I want them to be, so I have to imagine how the other parts are gonna look like. And then of course the next step would be to plan the entire illustration. I wanted to plan certain areas to be done digitally and certain areas to be done traditionally, and I'm also thinking about where the brushstroke should face, the directions and things like that. So once the planning is done, I can proceed to the next step, which is a very straightforward, easy step of painting just the portrait. This is the easiest step where it does not require any thinking. But I'm a bit worried because this is done digitally and I still want it to look a bit traditional. So what I'm doing, I'm actually putting in a watercolor paper texture to let myself see how it will look like if this is printed on watercolor texture grain paper. And luckily it looks quite okay. Well, if you are also interested on the brushes and tutorials on how I paint my portrait, you can check out my other tutorials, and also head over to my website to download the resources for my brushes and also the color palette that I'm using for this portrait itself. And step 7 would be to create Notan. The Notan is actually a pattern of light and shadow in just 2 shades, which is black and white, to model out the structure or the painting itself or of the subject matter itself. So it's very important to do this study so that when you design the light and dark sections of the painting, you can still tell what object it is. So I'm going to do notans for every single part of the painting for now, which is all the collages. So this is gonna help me tremendously in the next few steps, as this is actually not gonna show up in the final painting, but I'm gonna use all the notan as a mask to mask away areas I don't want when I'm collaging the ink textures later on. And finally, once the Notan is done, I am moving forward to the biggest step of the process itself, which is to collage all the ink textures. So these ink textures are collected and curated from the net, and I've also painted most of them and then scanned them to create brushes in my Procreate where I can use them in this artwork. Once I've collaged all the ink textures together, I am actually using the Notan to erase areas that I do not want, and I am also putting down all these ink textures in a different color so that I can see them properly. Once it is down on the area and the location that I want, I can then change their colors to be in shades of gray or black or white. Now, as you're watching this, you're probably wondering, why am I doing this digitally? Why can't I just paint this traditionally for the entire artwork? Yes, that would actually be possible to do so, but Chinese painting is a very different approach compared to other genres of art forms, because Chinese painting really places a lot of emphasis on the importance of the brush stroke itself. So each brush stroke is thought to be very precious, and we have to be very thoughtful and mindful on how we place and what technique we use to execute the brush strokes in order to embody the spirit of the painting or the subject matter that we are painting at that time. So because of that, if I were to do this traditionally, it would take a really long time, and I would burn myself out mentally because I would have to think before I place each brush stroke. And digitally, while I'm doing it right now, I'm also like spending a really crazy amount of time just thinking like, where should I place each stroke? Should I rotate it? Should I transform it or warp it, liquefy it? What should I do to make the stroke shows the character of the piece a little bit more? So because I'm doing this digitally, it really helped me a lot in expressing my thought process and being really mindful about the whole thing. And I thought that it would be better than if I do this traditionally, but later you actually get to see me do this traditionally as well. So one of the difficulties that I faced during this process is because I'm working on an A2 size file format in Procreate. I'm actually using an iPad Pro for this, so it actually has a lot of memory and space available, but Procreate only gives me 26 layers for this A2 size artwork. So because of the limitations of the layers, I face a lot of problems and I have to keep merging all the layers, and I also ended up deleting a lot of layers. But sometimes it's really difficult to delete because you do not know when you need to use those layers again, and usually if you're doing this kind of complex work in Photoshop, you will actually leave most of the layers unmerged. But the way I worked around this in Procreate is I actually duplicated the project a couple of times because I needed to retain some of the layers in case I ever needed them again in the future. And just before I end the ink texture collage, I am actually erasing some of the elements behind certain elements such as the katana and the kunai and the armor, because I wanted to give white space in order for the elements to breathe between them. Because if everything is just so united, it looks like a big blob of like blackness, right? So I needed more white space in between the elements so that the artwork can breathe a little bit more. And once I'm done with the ink texture collaging, I'm going to move forward to coloring them.
Coloring!
To color them is actually really easy. I'm just using my saturation brush from my portrait brush pack to color each and every layer. And once I was coloring them, I was really happy that I kept all the layers, because at the beginning of the process, I did not know if I wanted to change the color. Now that I want to change the color, I'm glad I have the opportunity to, because I still retain most of the layers and I was able to do so.
Sumi E!
And now once that's done, we are finally ready to move on to the traditional part of the process. So I'm gonna actually do some of the areas again with ink, and of course the hair has to be done in ink because it's impossible to build the hair naturally with just digital ink textures, right? So the first thing that I like to do is to cut and prepare the rice paper. The rice paper is a traditional paper that Chinese and Japanese ink painters use. So this paper is very fragile. It's super thin compared to your regular watercolor paper, and it behaves differently too. So what I'm doing is I'm actually putting a layer of water to stretch the paper so that it does not buckle and it's a bit more flat when I'm painting later on. And now I'm actually using my iPhone to use as a projector to project the sketch on it. And after that, I'm ready to start painting. I'm just pouring Chinese ink, and then I'm going to use this Chinese brush to paint some of the strokes. So using the Chinese brush is similar to using like a traditional round painting brush, only it's a little bit more difficult because it's very soft. Some of them can be quite long, and to control it you actually need a lot of technique where you can use it in a clump and then paint it thinly to do thin hairs, or you can also spread it wide to do effects like strands of hair, and also use it sideways to do really thick strokes. So there was like a series of strokes that we need to study when we were learning all this stuff. And basically, if you can study calligraphy in Japanese or Chinese, you can paint anything you want, because calligraphy actually consists of all the strokes that you need to build any painting. Other than that, I'm also doing some flicks and splatters to put in certain areas of the painting, because I feel that I could improve parts of the painting by repainting them now. I'm actually working on 2 versions, and I'm looking at it and thinking like which part I need to improve, and should I paint more, should I work more on this area. And I'm just repeating the entire process for the second piece and trying to improve on the first one that I just did. So finally, I'm doing some calligraphy for this piece, which will appear in the t-shirt itself. Then I'm just going to scan them, and once I scan them and put it into Photoshop and process them, I'm going to bring them back all into Procreate to composite them together.
Last step.
Finally, once I'm done doing the final composition of all the brush strokes, I am working on the background right now. So the background, I'm deciding whether to put a mask or without a mask, because I'm thinking of a mask version and a non-mask version. So in the end, I went with both versions. So this will be available as a print on watercolor paper, and it will look very natural, as if it's painted right on the paper itself. And then also I have them ready in the t-shirt, and I'm just uploading them to my website. And if you like this process and you'd like to see more of how I create my art, leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough together with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!